which was a repetition of Lucia, as it appears they cannot venture, in the face of public disapprobation, to repeat Romeo and Julieta at present. As we were passing through the square, the carriage suddenly drew up, the coachman and footmen uncovered their heads, and an immense procession came passing along the cathedral, with lights and military music. There were officers in full uniform, with their heads uncovered, a long file of monks and priests, and a carriage carrying the host, surrounded by hundreds of people on foot, all bearing lighted torches. A band of military music accompanied the procession, all which astonished us, as it was no fête day. When at length, being able to pass along, we arrived at the opera, we were informed that they were carrying the viaticum to a rich acquaintance of ours, a general who has been indisposed for some time, and whose illness has now exhibited fatal symptoms. For him, then, these great cathedral bells are tolling heavily. For him the torches and the pompous procession, the sandaled monks and the officers in military array, while two bands of music are playing at his door and another in front of the cathedral, and in the midst of these sounds of monkish hymn and military music, the soul is preparing to wing its flight alone and unattended. But the sweet notes of Lucia drown all other from our ears, if not from our thoughts. In a house not many hundred yards off, they minister the host to the dying man, while here La Castellane, with her pretty French graces and Italian singing, is drawing tears from our eyes for fictitious sorrows. The theatre was pretty well filled, though there were some empty boxes, sights more hideous in the eyes of actors than toothless mouths. We sat with Madame la Baronne de , and nearly opposite was Madame , related to the Príncipe de la Paz, a handsome woman with a fine Bohemian cast of face, dark in complexion, with glittering teeth, brilliant eyes, and dark hair. La Castellane sang very well, with much clearness, precision, and facility. She is certainly graceful and pretty, but, except in her method, more French than Italian. Her style suits Lucia, but I doubt her having l'art noble sufficient for a Norma or a Semiramis. The bass improves upon acquaintance, but the handsome tenor is not. The audience seemed to me both indulgent and discriminating. They applauded the pretty prima donna con furor; they praised the bass when he deserved it, the tenor when it was possible, but where he sang false, nothing could extort them from a solitary viva. This discrimination makes their applause worth having, and proceeds less from experience or cultivation than from a musical instinct. In a visit we made this morning, we were shown a piece of embroidery, which, from its splendour and good taste, is worthy of observation, though by no means uncommon here. We went to call on the wife of a judge, who showed us all through their beautiful house, which looks out on the Alameda. In one of the rooms their daughter was engaged on a piece of embroidery for the altar of the chapel. The ground was the very richest and thickest white satin. The design was a garland of vine leaves with bunches of grapes. The vine leaves were beautifully embroidered in fine gold, and the grapes were composed of amethyst. I can conceive nothing richer and more tasteful than the general effect. The gold embroidery done in Mexico is generally very beautiful, and there are many ladies who embroider in great perfection. There is an amazing quantity of it used in the churches and in military uniforms. I have also seen beautiful gold embroidered ball dresses, but they are nearly out of fashion. We hear that General , though still ill, is likely to recover. 25th. This being the day of Santiago, the patron saint of Spain, C n was invited by the padres to San Francisco to attend mass in the church there. We were shown to the tribuna gallery of the Countess de Santiago, where they gave us chairs, and put down a piece of carpet. C n and the rest of the legation were in the body of the church, in velvet chairs, with lighted tapers in their hands. The saint was carried in procession, going out by the principal door, and making a tour of the streets, and returning by a side door. The music was pretty good, especially one soprano voice. 12 little boys were placed on crimson velvet benches on either side of the altar, representing pilgrims of Galicia, of which Santiago is the capital; handsome little fellows belonging to respectable families, dressed in robes of dark green or crimson, or violet coloured velvet, with falling lace collars. and the neck ornamented with gold and silver shells, a large pilgrim's hat fastened on behind and hanging down, and in their hands staffs with gold bells. They were beautiful children, and all behaved with becoming gravity and decorum during the ceremony, walking with much dignity in the procession. After the función we went out to Santiago, an old church near Mexico, where the Indians annually come in procession on this day, and sell their fruit, flowers, pulque, etc. All the waste ground near the church was covered with green booths, and there was a great crowd of carriages and horsemen and people on foot. The troops were drawn out escorting the procession to the church. But though the scene was curious as the remnant of an old established ceremony, and the Indians, with their booths and flowers and great show of fruit, were all very picturesque, the sun was so intense, that after walking about a little while, and buying tunas and nuts and peaches, we returned home, together with the Güera Rodriguez, who was in the carriage with us, and giving us a lively description of what this fête used to be in former days. Had a visit the same morning from the Señora M , whom I think even handsomer by daylight than she appeared to be at the opera, not always the case with dark beauties. 26th. Another representation of Vaccaj's Romeo and Julieta, with the second appearance of La Ricci. Music and Ricci seemed considered a failure. The Señor Cesari made the handsomest of Romeos as usual, but was ill and out of spirits. The opera as a whole was coldly received, the boxes in pit were nearly empty, and La Ricci seems unlikely to gain any favour with the public, though it must be confessed that she looked better, was more becomingly dressed, and both sang and acted better than the preceding night. Yesterday we went to a soirée at the Minister's. Madame Castellan and her tenor were there, and had come from a dinner given by a rich curate to the whole corps operatique, from the prima donna down to the joueur du fagote, and even to the tailor who makes the opera dresses, and his wife. This rich padre, it is said, spends a great part of his fortune in entertaining actors and singers. La Castellan, permission to that effect having been obtained from the manager, for it is against their agreement to perform in private houses, sang several airs to the piano, with much expression, especially from Robert le Diable and Nina Pazza per Amore, but I prefer her voice in the theatre. She is not at all beautiful, but has a charming face with a very musical expression. We returned home by moonlight, the most flattering medium through which Mexico can be viewed, with its broad and silent streets, and splendid old buildings, whose decay and abandonment are softened by the silvery light, its ancient churches, from which the note of the organ occasionally come pealing forth, mingled with faint blasts of music borne on the night wind from some distant procession, or with the soft music of a hymn from some neighbouring convent. The white-robed monk, the veiled female, even the ragged beggar, add to the picture; by daylight his rags are too visible. Frequently as the carriages roll along to the opera, or as, at a late hour, they return from it, they are suddenly stopped by the appearance of the mysterious coach with its piebald mules, and the eye surrounded by rays of light on its panels, a melancholy apparition, for it has come from the house of mourning, probably from the bed of death. Then, by the moonlight, the kneeling figures on the pavement seemed as if carved in stone. The city of Mexico by moonlight, the environs of Mexico at daybreak, these are the hours for viewing both to advantage, and for making us feel how all but the spirit of man is divine. In front of our house, I should say of the Mint, is the archbishop's palace, and in front of this palace, an object which has greatly excited our curiosity. It is an old man, who, whether as a penance or from some motive which we do not know, kneels, wrapped in his serape, beside the wall of the arzobispado from sunset till midnight, or later, for we have frequently gone out at 9 in the evening and left him kneeling there, and on our return at 1 in the morning have found him in the same position. He asks no alms, but kneels there silent and motionless, hour after hour, as if in the performance of some vow. We made a call this evening on the archbishop in his own palace, an enormously large building, a sort of street, like this Casa de Moneda. He received us very cordially, and looked very comfortable without his robes of state, in a fine cloth dressing gown lined with violet coloured silk. August 1st. We had a visit last evening from one of the directors of the mint, a curious and most original